Hello, I'm Anders, and this is my colleague Linus. We're here for the first time, and we're assistant lecturers in Blekinge, in Sweden. We work inside Technoscience studies in the context of media technologies. So we work with media programs. I've been working with games, and Linus with web extensions. Yeah, exactly. And because this is the first time we're here, we wanted to introduce ourselves as something. So then we took the Bartle test, and I know there's more done to it, but just to situate ourselves in how we perceive different things, which is also in the text. Technoscience then, from our point of view, it's a reality-producing practice. And they're intertwined. Knowledge is always partial and situated. It critiques anthropocentrism. I'm sorry for anthropocentrism and representationalism, and questions dichotomies such as subject object. Just once again to situate ourselves in this. So we returned to medium from McLuhan, and where the medium is the message. So and I think that's why we're here, because then we have all these different levels. Of course, we have what we see on the screen and what we do, but then what do games do? And according to McLuhan, a content of a medium is another medium, but the medium also excludes by doing something, and by going in, and the printing press is a good example from where we had like talking, and this was maybe not such an exception that it is today. And historically, so that the printing press was not only in regards to that the medium changed, but the way and certain realities were produced, like nationalism and other stuff like that. So we end up here. So we've been returning to Huizinga, and we're using the less indifference. So this is an inquiry where we found this thing, and we've been working with this thing. So we're here. Probably we need you more than you need us right now, and we're not trying to undermine or falsify. We're trying to add. And as Barad says, by returning, it is not by returning as in reflecting or going back to a past that was, but returning as in turning over and over again, diffracting anew, in the making of new temporalities. So here we come into Singas, and we want to, it's because we're here for the first time, I guess it's has come up. So we want to make a difference in that. We want to add something, and here I see the irony in, but somewhere we reject certain things. Play as a supercategory of actions for games, humans as a super object of agency in the process of becoming an ordinary life as something that you can step out from. And here's a our thought here is that games can be figured as reverberations within the real, and this is a question. So we will be quickly going into games and play. What is agential realism that we use, and then the reframing, and then games and design, because we do design within agential reality. So games as emergent within the real, how agency is enacted to remain accountable for our practices of knowing and becoming, and so what? I don't know if you want to listen to my colleague a bit.
So I can continue a bit. And as Anders said, there we ended up in this philosophical level of understanding games quite quickly, and fortunately there's already been a lot of resonances in respect to the other talks here, but also some dissonances in how we approach playing games. And we would like to pick up what Mullaby wrote an eloquent paper some years ago, where he made a few claims that what have happened with the games and play when we have bound them under, or games when they are bound under the supercategory of play. And he argues that that have made, or one of the main reasons that games are figured as safe, pleasurable, and unserious, and as such can be thought of as consequence-free. And in the end of the paper, we pick up that what one might say to you, as an example, is this a game to you? You probably have heard in some way or another, like trying to claim that what you make is, or what you are doing is some way unserious. And we would like to compare this to what we mean is some kind of overuse or misuse of the magic circle, and how we constantly put that outside of the real in some way, and apart from everyday life. So although we have been using a lot of the Souls series, and as we are concerned, we only place these 4 games into it, although I believe the 4th game, that Bloodborne, is in some cases also put into the. We don't like to do that. We think that it's not really a part of that series. But as we will see later on, we have coming in from this very new perspective with agential reality, which really is a shift on how we understand reality and how the world is in becoming. It's like it's too much to take on, like designing or fully analyzing or designing or doing something like a game in the Dark Souls series. So as you will see, we have really had to backtrack, not like step back one step, but like maybe step back 250 steps to particulars. But anyway, agential reality is what Liberal proposes by elaborating on Niels Bohr's ideas of quantum physics and philosophy as what is actually the real ontology of the real of the world, and she builds it from this disturbing duality between the electron being a particle or a wave, or is it both, or what is it actually? And the interesting thing there is that in recent years and the latest development of these experiments actually shows that it is not a duality. It can be either of, and it can be at the same time. And you can actually, with the latest experiments, I will say make the choice afterwards, although it's not actually a choice. But the way we engage and try to understand the world will actually have an effect on how we understand it. So what this shows, this latest experiments, is that the one thing that we have thought as given, like the time, and that's why before it couldn't be like both at the same time. It's actually that temporality is also made manifest in this quantum phenomena, and that's of course her basic experiments that she builds from, and then she have developed that further, and that's what we have taken to our practices. And the other parts of that is, of course, then Agential realism, which is not the ontology, but more the philosophy. So she claims that you can't really make this separation between what is epistemology and what is ontology, because they are intertwined. So in that way, it's a direct challenge to representational metaphysics. So what she is, in the extension of Bohr promoting, is instead a performative metaphysics, and that means, among other things, that the relata, that's what is in relation. It does not pre-exist as such, because they are both the relata and the relations are made manifest in the entanglement of their becomings. So of course, when we maybe not stumble upon it, because it's been part of Technoscience studies for quite long, but we started to ask ourselves these questions: should we bother with this, or is this just some kind of abstract, strange quantum physical that we don't have to take care about? But we decided, so now we should not just, we have to try to make sense of what can that mean to us as designers. And it really shifts a lot of things, and it shifts also agency, because agency cannot, in this sense, any longer be designed as an attribute to something, such as subjects or objects. Actually, it cannot be an attribute whatsoever, because it is in doing being, in its interactivity, that agency is made manifest or is enacted. And that also makes that it's enacted in different way to particular practices. So to make some kind of maybe more simple example of how these subject-object relationships and agency are enacted in respect to some kind of magic circle, also maybe like take the example when you sit in the sofa and you're playing a video game with maybe a console-based game with a controller. Actually, we would argue that the subject in that sense is not me as some kind of abstract human entity or very physical human entity, and the controller and everything else is part of some object. Actually, that there are more to what should be considered the subject in that sense, namely the controller, maybe even the avatars we have seen in several cases here, and then. But then again, let's say the battery runs out, so the controller immediately then becomes an object again, because it doesn't really make sense to figure it as part of the subject anymore. So it's like this subject-object dance all the time. What becomes subject and what becomes object, in a sense, maybe very much related to the cyborg discussion earlier.
And I can add there, not only that do the agential cuts, which gives agency from within phenomena, they can not only cut within. I don't know if some of you have at least, but when I was playing like Ultima Online, and so and there was a call, and the phone line breaks the internet connection. So I mean where the agency is cut by someone picking up the phone and that immediately becomes part of what would be the game. Or like in Alien Isolation, where if you do not know that the Xbox cam is taking in sound, some people who have a vacuum or a noisy apartment cannot go past a different point in the game, and the agency or the cuts gets made, and thanks. So, so.
Okay, so this might sound a little bit so, but so we found Agential Realism. We really think it's, we say that it's great, but it's more like, to me at least, it's been really like finally this makes sense. This is finally like an understanding of the world that makes sense to me. But, and we have found it very useful in very different circumstances to use this like some kind of analysis framework to understand different ways in a world in becoming might be understood and practice situations and such. But then on the other hand, do we need to do something more? Do we need like additional methods to what we do? And I mean, are games everything, or can everything be a game? And what sense would that make? So we have tried to like backtrack a lot in our practices and what we do.
Here it's just to show you that, I mean, when we're talking about theory, it's easy to become really lofty, but Barad really ties this down in the practice, and we're not like quantum physicists. So, and we really had to take it down. So for the last year, we have been working from dice up. We started with one die, and then we can see like the fraction patterns. We haven't really gone through it today, but just the very simple thing that where do the values come from, and if we include one more die, the whole pattern changes, and we can't really look at either we're a part of the change that happens, or we can observe where the change happens in the pattern that's coming out. So, for example, if you would take one die, of course you can have 1 and 6 and discrete numbers, in this case a 6-sided die, but if we add another die, you get a whole different diffraction patterns out from the die, and some numbers are even excluded, like 1. There is no 1. So if we then measure it this time, and then we did a lot of almost dadaistic dies, like this was during a PhD course, and people got really upset because the die would, these 4 dice, when tossed, they would be able to create sentences that were really hard to distinguish from like the texts that we use to do this, because Haraway and Barad and the other ones are pretty lofty often. So some took this as a direct critique, almost atheistic, and I mean and this is just a very simple diffraction apparatus, if you want to call it that. So just no, we haven't made an MMO. We haven't come that far. We're trying to tie this down into practice and see what can we do with it. So continuing on, where do we want this to lead? This is a quote: particular possibilities for acting exist at every moment, and these changing possibilities entail a responsibility to intervene in the world's becoming, to contest and rework what matters and what is excluded from the mattering. So we have like a couple of things we want this to be able to contribute to, and it's computer game ethics, because it really feels like this could open up more space, at least for me. Anticipation and structuring of desiring force and enacting agency, continuing explorations of what this means for designer becomings, and then we're working on this reverb, play with sound, like design framework for what are we designing, can we design, and how do we act within that space. And there's a couple of emails here, so if, if you want to give us some pointers later on, that would be much appreciated from this context. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, and now it's time for questions. Oliver?
All right, so it seems to me that your account presupposes a particular way of looking at the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. Couldn't that also be seen as a possible weakness of this account? I mean, the correct interpretation of the quantum mechanical math is still open, and very much open to debate. Likewise, it's open to debate how exactly we should understand Niels Bohr's own views. For example, philosophers of science like James Ladyman and others have actually advanced the view that we can, from Bohr's writings, we can infer that the universe is, or we could infer and speculate that the universe is fundamentally probabilistic and stochastic, and that there are only relations and no relata, no entities whatsoever, not even in relations. It's just relations all the way down. Now, this is, of course, highly controversial. I'm not saying that this is the correct way to look at things, and I'm just asking that whether it, could it be a possible Achilles heel of this account that it's so so integrated with a very specific reading of Niels Bohr? Thank you.
It very well could be that, and of course your point there, I believe I forgot to say the most crucial point, I believe, with Agential reality, because it's just that it refuses like objects as the most simple building blocks of ontology, and instead puts phenomena in there. And Karen Broad herself is she says exactly that. If the math would go, or if continuing quantum physical experiments would point to something else, she would be the first one to throw this out. But as of now, there is the claim that this is actually evidence of let's call it a Derridian ontology that makes up the world. So of course there is this weakness. But then again, I mean, if we weren't to say that this is the reality understanding that we work from, I believe everyone works from some idea of reality, and perhaps, I mean, we have heard it several times that some things are part of reality or some things are existing and not, but I haven't still heard anyone claiming what kind of reality or whose reality is that.
Any more questions? Okay,
I have a much more simple question. I hope. I don't know. In the end, you had the example of the two dice. Then, as generators, if I understood you correctly, of kind of that wave particle distribution. I don't. That's okay. Let me get to my actual point. What I'm missing there is the point as game designers, you're using dice as generators of randomness, for lack of a better word, and the dice are still coded very much, right? What they mean, and you have, of course, you make one dimension of that coding very clear with your example, your little game that you then created by using dice with signifiers on them instead of numbers. But when you look at very traditional games like the original old Indian traditions of playing POCG, where you use 6 conch shells and where actually these binary these binaries are strictly coded into a matrix of which, which result means how many steps you go. So it's not like, one conch shell is pointing up, so now I go one field. It's an incredibly complex matrix of what that means with a logarithmic lookup table, basically, that everybody has in their head. And so what I'm trying to get at is simply, I'm not quite sure how rules then figure into that, the complete construction of a game. I don't know if that is a question. It's really, could you elaborate on what you, in general, then would do, for example, with dice if you don't just put signifiers on them?
Yeah, it's a good point. So yeah, I play like figure games. I play with dice, and that's why we took them. But our first, we were just showing it to show that even if we say that we adhere to these like lofty ideas and difficult things, where we started was just dice. It's not even a game. We just wanted to show an apparatus that creates a diffraction pattern. So we're at that point we're not even making a game. It's only our way of trying to begin at our practices and really think about what happens with when these things are put in that kind of reality, to start exploring space for design. So it's, you're completely right, it's not a game, and yeah, it's just our way of showing where we started with it.
No, I think now I can frame my question better. I think it is a game, and it has that implicit rule. That's exactly my point. When you rule these dice, and then your participant said, "Oh, this is borderline offensive because I can't form sentences out of it." Right? You have kind of our natural language processing then as the rule of what those dice mean. So there are always those rules. That you seem to bracket out.
Yeah, of course. I was talking about the two, like discrete dice. Then the other one was like more like a Dadaistic project with trying to show, because when we talk about diffraction patterns and where agency lies and apparatuses and what happens, then it just became like fun to start playing with it. So that was of course more of a maybe it's a game, maybe it was just to see if it could do something, and the diffraction patterns that it does, I mean, it offended, and some thought it was funny, and we have all these cuts, but so yeah, that you could call game. The other one was just that we started with like one die and not even what we ascribe to the numbers, because that's, we have continued working, but still.
If I may build upon the last two questions, I think that our better understanding at this point of quantum physics, and without being a quantum physicist, is probabilistic indeed. And I think what comes out from the double slit experiment that you showed is, first of all, the particle duality, and the other problem is compared to Newtonian physics, is that we cannot know, like the Schrodinger cat problem. So we cannot know what, if it's dead or alive, or what is the state. So it's kind of it's an indeterminacy problem. So you can know some aspects of the properties of the particle behaviors, but if you try to measure it, then you screw up the whole system. So I don't know if you can. So I mean, and this is a bit different than the combinatorics that you showed with the dice. So I think this is, I have the impression that it's a different paradigm. Maybe you have an explanation for that, but I don't know how you can apply it in design, but it could be useful in to be applied in philosophy and analysis of video games and of ontologies. But for that, I think you have to abstract from definitions. So you cannot have definitions of agency or player, like concrete ones, and then you have to kind of have spectral definitions, or allow for this kind of play of your foundations, and then work on a meta level of, if things are fluid, or my ontologies and foundations are fluid, I start from there and I analyze it, I guess.
I think part of it is it is indeterminate within Agential realism, of course, but it's not that like you disturb or interfere in something that is transcendental in some sense. So there is not something really behind, and when we try to look at it, we disturb it, and we cannot really get a glimpse of it. It's not that kind of indeterminacy. It is really the way we engage in the world is actually what makes part of the world intelligible to us. So the other parts are not like non-existence. The other parts that are right now not intelligible to us are just as required for that part of the world to materialize. So it's not uncertainty. There is no uncertainty left at all in it, so to speak. But what then I guess taking that further, what that actually is supposed to mean to us as designers in the long run, we don't know. We have been working a lot of years using this as an analytical lens, and that makes a lot of sense often. But in the other hand, in our design or more productive practices, if I may call them that, that's where we're back at DICE right now. So I don't have any answer to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to finish our discussion now. And thank you for your presentation and for answers for questions.